Your life journey doesn't stand still, and neither should your wealth. Welcome to Wealth on the Move, the podcast. Welcome back to Wealth on the Move, the podcast. I'm Will Hoffman, your host, and I have a very important guest. And I say important because our paths crossed a few years ago with the monetary mixtape and my participation in a LinkedIn group called Gen X Nation. And our paths crossed, and she was actually the last guest on the monetary mixtape before we transitioned to Wealth on the Move. But I have Michele Walter, and Michele Walter has become a great friend, a great resource, and it seems like our conversations go on and on and on in multiple directions. That could be a result of my paralyzing ADHD sometimes and lack of focus. But it is always a benefit to talk with Michele. I always learn something. And I always learn something about myself and my analysis on how I'm looking at scenarios with my business and just with life in general. So I'm very excited to introduce Michele Walter from Life.
That's okay. Life from the Summit.
Life from the Summit. I said life at the summit. Life from life from the summit. Hailing to us from Colorado right now. So welcome to Wealth on the Move, Michele. It's great to have you here, and I'm excited to have a little bit of a conversation about money and kind of finish off our topics on how we view money and money dysphoria and things. So welcome.
Thank you. And it is definitely Coloradoing today. We're getting snow yesterday and today. And I feel deeply grateful for that introduction and for the connection that we've been able to foster without ever having met in person, by the way.
Yeah, we still have never met in person. It'll happen one day, I'm sure.
Yep. So yeah, I'm happy to be here and always glad to have conversations. I am not a short form conversation person, and so I relate on the like the long conversation. So if I start going on and on, feel free to interject.
Well, the nice thing is about a podcast is there's no deadline. There's no timeline. We can talk for as long as we want to about whatever we want to. But we have been talking about really two different topics when it comes to money in our last two episodes. The first was lifestyle creep and our desire for, as we earn more and achieve more when it comes to our personal balance sheets and our careers, we spend more. And all of a sudden our lifestyle creeps up to a place where we haven't saved more. We haven't gained any financial independence. We've gained stuff and things and maybe even responsibilities, but we haven't gained more financial independence or put ourselves on a path towards the financial independence we desire. And then the last conversation that Bryn and I had was about, for lack of a better term, money dysphoria. And looking at money like there's never enough, and maybe foregoing enjoying our money because we're in a state of worry or state of concern that we're going to misspend, and then all of a sudden there's going to be an emergency and need it. So Michele does one thing great whenever we talk. And one question that she asks, quite frankly, her asking me this question all the time has made me a better advisor, because now we ask our clients this question. But she'll always ask me, how does that feel? I guess I want to start our conversation with Michele. Is that something that is from your business, your practice as a coach, as a mindfulness coach, that you ask people how they feel about certain things? Is that where that stems from?
Probably is the short answer.
Okay.
And the little bit longer answer, and I'm kind of hearkening back to our Gen X background here, is that not only our generation, but older generations and younger generations too, because of how we tend to pass on our conditioning and messages, we're not encouraged as a society to think that getting in touch with ourselves and our bodies and our sensations and our emotions is something that is appropriate to do. And that's how I functioned most of my life, as a very analytical type A, all in my head lawyer, until I started about 5, 8, I don't even know, 8 years ago now, doing more work around mindfulness and coaching and learning that. And I'm going to be frank here. I think the tendency that we have to want to disconnect from how we feel is a cop out.
Okay.
It's not the stronger tact. If you really want to find courage and find clarity and be a warrior in your life for whatever it is that we're talking about, you need to learn how to get in touch with your feelings, because they are your, as I like to say, your inner compass.
Yeah.
They're going to be what guides you. And so that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, how do you feel?
Well,
Is a great
and
question.
I want to touch on something there, and then I completely skipped ahead and skipped over a more proper introduction of you and what you do in your business. But I want to touch on something there because I have 3 boys, and my 3 boys are very active, whether it's sports or my oldest son is getting into photography a lot now, and the artistic side of that. My middle son and Miles and youngest son Nolan are into sports and basketball and lacrosse and things, and they're very competitive, very, very competitive, which, if it's done the right way, is a great characteristic trait, in my opinion. Just like anything, you have to be healthy with it. But when we are at sporting events, and I coach, I love to coach. I love the front row seat to what they're doing and being there for all of it. It never bothers me that kids are upset that they've lost. It never bothers me that they're crying when they lost. And I'm always a little concerned that they're being told to not cry when they lose, and to not tap into that. And my thoughts have always been, it's okay. That means it was important to them. It means winning that lacrosse match or that basketball game or that baseball game was important. And they're devastated that something that important was, they didn't achieve, and to let them tap into those emotions. As long as they're good sports about it, that's what's important. And I don't know if that kind of is along the same lines of your thinking there. Is, listen, we have to tap into these feelings, because if not, they're going to consume us.
Yeah. And I am deeply grateful that you are passing that messaging along, not only to your kids, but the kids that you coach, because it's the importance piece. And to take that a little bit deeper, as human beings, we are meant to be full human beings. And that means experiencing the full spectrum of all of the emotions that are available to us. I have a personal beef with toxic positivity, because the way I see the world is that there's kind of these 3 layers to it, where at the top is this toxic positivity, silver lining, like everything happens for a reason, ignorance is bliss kind of
Okay.
level. And these are the people that function purely in, it's all good, like let's just be happy, let's not focus on the bad. If that works for you,
You probably have
fine.
the same trouble with the phrase that I hate. The phrase, "It is what it is." That phrase.
I'm gonna get. I'm
Okay.
oh, so glad you mentioned that. I'm gonna try and
That
shift your perspective
phrasing.
on that phrase,
Okay.
because this is exactly it. So there are phrases, there are ways of being in life that if we handle them, approach them, have a relationship with them at the superficial level of just wave your hands in the air like you just don't care, you are functioning as a half human.
Okay.
And now let me just say too, by the way, when we are talking about getting in touch with feelings, I recognize that there are people with different neuro abilities that getting in touch with feelings is challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not talking about that for right now. I'm talking
Okay.
about just other people who are unconsciously not getting in touch with our feelings, right? So if you are living up here, this is like the unconscious level, because you're only experiencing part of what life has to offer. What typically happens is something bad in life happens, or something painful or annoying, whatever it is, that pulls us down or wants to pull us down into this second level, which is a darker, heavier, more contracted, restrictive place. Most humans don't want to be down in that second level. We're like, get me the hell out of here. I want to go back up here where
Right.
life is fun. It is what it is. And so I don't want to be down here. Let me claw my way back up to the toxic positivity.
Okay.
The invitation that I want to plant for people is that when we, through practices and teachings and knowledge and spaces that are safe for us, when we learn to come through that heavier constricted part, like think of this like an hourglass, right? Like the superficial level is the fat part of the hourglass at the top. Then we come down into that constricted tiny part of the hourglass. If we can learn to move through that, then we come out to the bottom part of the hourglass, which is actually the more conscious level, where we can then say it is what it is because we have a deeper appreciation for the depth of the experience that we've been through. Because we know that it is what it is means that every moment can be allowed to be what it is because we can hold anger and joy at the same time, happiness
Okay.
and sadness at the same time. So that's that bottom layer, because then what happens is then eventually we flip the hourglass, and what was once our new consciousness starts to kind of become our unconscious again. And we keep going through the process. So that's why I say sayings like, it is what it is, this too shall pass. Those can be used in a very toxic positivity way, unless you have a deeper appreciation for the full human experience of all the ick and all the crap and all the heaviness that actually brings you to a much richer level of joy and consciousness, where you're like, oh, it is what it is because I'm a full human who can create space for everything, not just the toxic positivity, feel good stuff.
I got you. Okay. So I do have a different outlook now. Like I said, every time I talk to you, I learn something and maybe about myself and my interactions with others, and which, because I was so eager to start talking right away, I completely blew by the opportunity for you to introduce yourself and
You
tell
did a
us
great introduction.
a little bit about Life from the Summit and your podcast, the Gen X Shift, and a little bit about, your business. So let's start with, give us a little bit of a background about Michele and how you got to where you are at this point.
Yeah, and I'll try and keep it brief because we might have gotten into some of this on our last episode together. So, long story short, I was born in 1972, so tried and true Gen Xer who grew up in a trailer down by the Platte River in Nebraska, playing outside, unsupervised, and really isolated from a lot of other experiences in the world in good and bad ways. Like I grew up fairly safe. My parents didn't have a lot of money, so we were technically poor, although I have a hard time sort of with that label because I still had a lot of privilege that came along with that too. Like I always ate, I always had clothes, all of that. So all of that's to say, like I didn't grow up with a lot of money. I also didn't grow up with a great relationship or knowledge of money because my parents, as boomers, didn't talk about money. They constantly scrimped and saved, and money was always a source of tension and a source
Okay.
of scarcity. And so I was always a good straight A student, always battled my own depths of never feeling like I was enough. Not because my parents did anything to contribute to that, I don't think, but because something in me always felt like I was just never enough, like I could never be enough or do enough or be pretty enough or smart enough. And so I was constantly trying to overcompensate, overachieve. And so I was straight A, went to college, first person in my family to go to college, first person in my family to go to law school, and became a lawyer, eventually moved to DC because I was very fortunate to meet people who thought I was a good person and thought I did good work. I ended up getting hired at the Department of Justice and did environmental litigation for 20 years with the Department of Justice. Had a brief stint at a law firm in the middle of that before I decided that law firm life was not for me. Went back to DOJ. And in 2012, my mom died suddenly from a heart attack when she was just 58 and I was 40. She was working late in her office one night past midnight and had a heart attack and died alone in her office. And she was my biggest champion. We didn't always agree on everything, but she supported me no matter what. And so her sudden death really threw me for a loop. And I think that's when I really started questioning the fact that I never really felt like being a lawyer had been the right path for me. I just did it because I didn't know what else to do. I
Right.
was a psych major in college, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with a psych major, so I'll go to law school. And I just always kind of fell ahead, again, very fortunately, into the next thing. And so I just became a lawyer because I didn't know what else to do, but it never felt like me. There were things about it I liked, but I didn't ever feel like I was in the right place. I was just doing it because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. And so in 2016, after I'd spent years really struggling and starting to burn out and feeling much more depressed and anxious, I decided to move to Colorado because I thought, oh, the mountains will make everything better. And I moved out here and actually got a lot worse because I realized that I did not want to spend my days in an office arguing with attorneys all day long about a motion for extension or arguing with political appointees about positions we should take. It's not how I wanted to spend my time. And so I got very depressed, very anxious, spent a lot of time in my closet crying and a lot of thoughts about not wanting to be here anymore. So eventually, through some fortuitous meetings, I stumbled on mindfulness practices and coaching practices and met some people who'd gone through some mindfulness meditation and coaching certifications. And so I decided, let's see, I'll just enroll in these programs and see what happens. So I did 2 certification programs while I was still working full time as a lawyer. I did a 2-year mindfulness meditation certification with Tara Brock and Jack Kornfield. We're kind of 2 of the popular Western mindfulness teachers. And then also did a 9-month coaching certification program with the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching. Got my certifications, decided I can't be a lawyer anymore because I think it's actually going to kill me. And so hatched a plan to get my 20 years in so that someday I'll have a pension and start my own business. And so in June of 2021, I quit. I did not retire. I am not retired. I'm not taking retirement income. I quit to pursue my business life from the summit full time so that I could start to bring these mindfulness and coaching practices to other people because I want to be careful to say, like, I still struggle with the depression, with the anxiety, with thoughts of like, why am I even here? And the mindfulness and coaching practices are a way to help buoy me during those times. And so I know that my journey is probably the same as a lot of other people who just kind of spent their life doing what they thought they were supposed to do and kind of unconsciously falling into the next thing. And then we hit this point in our 40s where things start to happen and we realize, what am I doing? This isn't the life that I wanted to create for myself. There's got to be more. And so I want to use these principles to help people find what their next chapter is and kind of come back to themselves.
And that's the premise and summary of what Life from the Summit is a coaching business that helps folks. I mean, I know you do some corporate coaching and things, work through those things.
Yeah.
And then you blossom that to the Gen X Shift podcast.
Right. Yeah. I found this topic of transition kind of hit me over the head a couple of years ago when I was sort of thinking, well, what direction do I want to take the business? And I had a duh moment, like transitions, like that's what I know about. I've gone through a lot of transitions in life and people at this stage are going through a lot of transitions.
Sure.
And companies, yes, too, are going through a lot of transitions. And so my focus is really on whether it's individuals of Generation X or whether it's companies, people who are facing transitions and want to move through them with more consciousness and more practices that can actually help them come down to that deeper level of consciousness like we talked about, so that they can move through both tough transitions and ones that aren't so tough, like voluntary and involuntary transitions.
Okay.
We need support going through either of those kinds of
Yes.
transitions.
Because our profession sees folks through those transitions and the impact it has on their money and the impact it has on their spending or saving or, those transitions can lead to significant financial issues, folks that are selling a business and going through a what is supposed to be the financial high of their life. They've culminated their life's work into a monetization process, and they go through that with a lot of fear because they're worried about what's next. And we're talking about highly ambitious people that they've reached that summit, to borrow the term, and they look up and there's nothing left. What happens next? So that was always why I think your insight's always been valuable to how we, help our clients, because keeping their values and their mindfulness in the middle of their money becomes very, very important during those times. And there's always times of volatility when it comes to money. We're still only 16 years away from the financial crisis, where we still see the impacts of the Great Depression on folks' money habits through how they've been taught about money. So it's always been, a great resource for us to be able to tap into your knowledge for how we work with folks. So when we talk about kind of the things that we just mentioned when it comes to either, that old phrase, keeping up with the Joneses, and maybe spending irrationally when it comes to that, or the opposite, and hoarding money because of an innate fear that could go wrong. What are your thoughts on why folks go through those, or why that happens, and how do we tap back into what's important to us?
On a simplistic level, both of those situations and everything in between is fueled by what I believe and call like not enoughness.
Okay.
Is the root of so many of the experiences that we suffer through. And by not enoughness, I mean the experience that everyone has. Every human being has this. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't feel like enough, I'm awesome. Trust me, you do feel like not enough at some point in your life. And so not enoughness is just the very base human experience we have of feeling like, as I was saying when I was growing up, I can never be enough. I'm never pretty enough, smart enough, wealthy enough, committed enough, whatever it is, that until we start to become aware of the ways that we are behaving in life to assuage that not enoughness, we are going to keep getting ruled by it.
Okay.
You had mentioned that I said something on one of my podcast episodes about how what we swallow ends up swallowing us.
Yes.
And so when we are constantly ignoring or stuffing down or dismissing the ways in which we don't feel enough, it ends up swallowing us and it rules us. So if you are somebody who feels like, I can never save enough for retirement, I'm never going to have enough, I'm never going to measure up to what my family expects of me or what my colleagues are doing, I don't have the car, I don't have the house. If you are constantly being ruled from that place of not being enough, it's no surprise when you keep perpetuating the same cycle over and over again. So we want to start to recognize when that not enoughness is showing up for us and driving us, not to get rid of it, because coming back to what I said earlier, we want to allow for our full human experience. So
Right.
We're not trying to get rid of it. We're trying to become aware of it and change our relationship with it so that we can start to say, okay, I recognize, for example, I'll take my experience as a lawyer. I never felt like enough as a lawyer for both justified and unjustified reasons. I didn't go to a fancy law school. I didn't clerk. I wasn't on law review. I didn't feel like I measured up to the experience that other very well-qualified Department of Justice attorneys have. On the flip side of that, I also never felt like enough because I knew it just wasn't me. I felt misaligned with being a lawyer. So we want to start to become aware of the not enoughness so that we can see what it's telling us. Is it telling you that you don't feel like enough because maybe this isn't what's aligned for you or where you belong? And that can be a healthy insight. Or is it telling you you're not enough because you don't live up to external standards? That's kind of an unhealthy insight. And so then when we have that, okay, what can we do? How can we start to heal through that unhealthy insight so we can shift that? And if you want to make more money because you want to make more money, let's do that, as opposed to making more money so that you feel like you can compare and live up to what other people expect of you.
Yeah, that's always that's a very common question especially with new clients, is how am I doing compared to other, especially baby boomers going into retirement, their question is, how am I doing compared to other baby boomers? And to me, that's the least likely barometer that folks should be using for success.
Yeah. Can I
Am I?
pause on that real
Yeah,
quick?
please.
If somebody were to say that to me, my question to them would be, what is the importance to you of knowing how you are doing with respect to other baby boomers?
Okay.
What feels important about that to you? And then see where that goes,
Yeah.
because
See,
that's
my
trying to,
reaction is
yeah.
always it does. I always and shame on me for maybe discounting that question, but we always say it's not important on how you're doing compared to other baby boomers. It's how important, how you're doing in relation to your financial plan, what you want to achieve with your money. Because if you desire for a let's just say you want to leave a large financial legacy, and you're comparing yourself to somebody who says, you know what, uh, I don't care about a legacy. I want the last check that I write before I die to bounce. Well, then you guys have there. How you're doing compared to that person is immeasurable. There is no measuring stick there, because you
Hmm.
both have two different, very valid goals that we're working with, but they're not comparable by any means.
Hmm.
And I want to
Yeah,
ask
because,
something too, and
yeah.
going back to the never not enoughness, and this may be something that's meant for a different podcast that's not about money and more about parenting. But as a father of three kids, I'm going to ask this question: is it better that kids experience this not enoughness early so they can learn to deal with it?
Oh, yes. I'm so glad you
Because
asked that question.
we we don't want them to lose. We don't want them to have a bad grade. We don't want them to experience adversity so that they don't experience that never enoughness. And, is that our own BS coming through to them? Is that, and again, we're getting way far away from money, but kids experiencing that, and learning how to deal with that may set them up for future financial success. So I don't want to
Yeah.
apologize for the question,
Yeah.
but
No.
eh, you know, can you give us some insight there? Is there a right way to look at that? And how do we do that?
I'm taking a deep breath because there are 50 different paths that I could go down
I'm
with this
sure.
question. So I'm trying to consolidate my thoughts because it is all related. And so I want to come back to something that you said about coaching and witnessing kids crying when they lose. I'm not a parent, and I am also a human being who cares a lot about other people and our shared experiences and encouraging people to validate their own experience. So when a kid is crying because they have lost, or when your child is feeling like they're not enough because they didn't get an A on a test or they can't do math or whatever it is, the first go to for yourself and for other people is to always validate the experience of that emotion. And so
Okay.
this comes back to the people that you say come in and they're saying, I want to know how I'm doing compared to other boomers. I don't fault you for your response to that question because it's understandable. And the other avenue is to validate their experience of, I see that that's very important to you. Can you tell me more about why that's important to you? So with your kid, for example, who's experiencing some not enoughness in some respect, I get the tendency to want to protect our children from those things. Of
Hmm.
course, we don't want our kids to feel like they're not enough. Of course, we want to protect. I was texting with a friend of mine who's like, I've already had to have the hard conversation with my kids about stranger danger and don't approach windowless vans. Like, of course, you want to protect your kids from the world. You would not be a good parent otherwise. And where we want to loosen our grip a little bit is to fully embrace and acknowledge the visual I gave before about the hourglass, that we want to teach our kids how to go through those tough, challenging experiences and emotions, because that's how they get to the deeper layers of experiences
Hmm.
and life. And that's, by the way, how we build resilience. We don't
Sure.
build resilience by sticking our head in the clouds,
Right.
right? So being able to, number one, validate those emotions and that experience for your kids for your clients, for yourself. In this moment, I feel like a worthless piece of crap. That is okay.
Yeah.
It is okay to feel like that. And it's also not the complete truth of what's happening. And so then the second step, once you've validated that for yourself or for your kids or for your clients, is to get curious about what's the story that I'm telling about why I don't feel like enough or why I'm not saving like other boomers are saving. Like tell me some of the thoughts, the stories that you're telling around that. The third step would be, okay, now we've told that story. What might be some other stories that you could also tell without getting rid of the original story? It's just opening up to what are the other stories. So if you feel like a worthless piece of crap because you didn't get an A on a test, what else might be true? Maybe you have a strength for reading that is wonderful, where you definitely are enough. So it's getting curious about those stories.
Right.
And then the final piece of that, or maybe not even final, but like the fourth piece of it would be to be kind to yourself or to the person who's experiencing that. Not trying to sugarcoat it, but just saying, yeah, this is really hard.
Yeah.
This is really hard.
I'm sorry for chuckling there. I'm thinking there used to be a commercial, and I don't know what it was for, but it was a guy on a golf course named Steve who hit a bad shot and is really getting down on himself. And then this voice says, "Hey, go easy on Steve, Steve." And I was chuckling about that because you're right. We're probably our own toughest critic. We're our own worst enemy. There was something else you said there too about, going through the tough stuff, the sensation that, okay, maybe I'm not enough, is valid and part of the experience. Imagine the world, and I shouldn't say it like it's this dramatic, but let's imagine basketball. If Michael Jordan's mother would have gone and complained to the coach because her son got cut from the basketball team his sophomore year of high school, and he didn't go through that experience of, okay, I know I'm enough. I'm going to be enough. And not only am I going to be enough, but I'm going to be the best basketball player to ever grace this planet. Instead, his mom went and complained to the coach. The coach put him on the bench and said, okay, you can practice with the team. We're not going to cut you. I'm so sorry. Here's a uniform for you. And, next year he was okay and average and kept being average because mom didn't make him go through that. Instead, mom said, okay, you have a choice. You either give it up or get better. Those are your choices. Nike would be a different company. The NBA would be a different experience. We wouldn't
Kids
have
would
the
be
motivation.
different.
Yeah, we wouldn't have the motivational posters on our wall that says, how dare you cut my kid? Instead, it would, or we wouldn't have the motivational posters of him, missing shots and he succeeds. Instead, we'd have mom standing there talking to the coach saying, why did you cut my kid?
Two or three things with that. That's such a great example. And I'll try and make these brief. I'm so glad that you said that, because that just shows the importance of parents being able to support their kids through those hard times instead of protecting them and like building a fort around the tough times and the tough emotions, or saying, don't cry, stop your crying. Don't, like, being able to sit with kids in that uncomfortable experience and instill in them practices and tools that they can use to move through that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that means the parents have to know how to do that for themselves first. So it all starts with you. Like, you as the parent need to be comfortable with your own heavy stuff, with your own not enoughness, so that you can model that and help your kids through that. And the third thing, there's probably four. The third thing is, I live this because my parents, almost to a fault, at least my mom, not so much my dad. My mom, in her eyes, I walked on water. Like, I could do no wrong. So it's almost to the complete opposite, where because I always got good grades, I was always like the good kid, like the good girl. I did not develop any flexibility for failure. And so now, as an adult with a business, failure is front and center all the time.
Day, right?
And so there's actually this chronic trauma that we see when kids are too isolated, and then they grow up into adults that don't have the resilience, don't have the flexibility for things like failure and setback and feedback and that kind of thing. So we need to be able to be present. And then the last present with those heavy things. See, my brain is firing at 500 miles an hour. And the last thing I will say, and this might be a good entry point into some of the more money stuff, is I don't remember if I shared this equation last time or not, but it's an equation I share all the time that was sort of developed by a man named Shinzen Young, who's a Buddhist monk. And the equation is suffering equals pain times resistance.
Yes. Yeah. You have shared that. You've at least shared that with me.
Yeah. I don't
know
remember
that
if I shared on the podcast. Yeah. Because what that means is that life is always going to have pain. It comes back to what I said earlier about the full human experience. You can't hide from that. And if you try and hide from it, you are actually just exacerbating your suffering. So the more we can find the resistance to the pain, notice the resistance, find ways to ease the resistance. We might not even fully get rid of it, but ease the resistance. We can suffer less. And so when we notice like the not enoughness coming up, especially in the money realm, that's a painful thing. Thinking you don't have enough money is a painful thing.
Yeah.
How are you resisting that? Are you resisting it by trying to just make money for the sake of making money? Are you resisting it by shutting down and thinking I'm always going to be broke? Because however you're resisting it doesn't change the fact that you don't have enough money right now, right? Like we need to put food on the table. We need to pay the bills, right? That external fact won't change. How much you suffer in the face of that external fact is what you have control over, because we don't have control over a lot of external things. What we do have control over is our response to them. And so how do we ease our resistance to the painful things that we are experiencing so that we suffer less, so that we can actually respond more wisely instead of reacting unwisely to life?
Yes. I think that suffering equation, you and I both have a common background with endurance sports. I think that was where we made the connection was, how that can apply to, training and actual race day things as well.
Yep. Because it sucks to run a marathon, or for me, it sucks to run a marathon. Like that's painful. And so if you're running every step of the marathon going, this sucks, this is painful, you're just suffering more.
Right.
So it's not about saying, oh, this is great, this is fun. That's toxic positivity. It's about noticing, okay, this is painful, this sucks. What's the story I'm telling about this pain? Oh, this pain means that I might not finish. What's another story I could tell about the pain? This pain means maybe it's an invitation for me to relax a little bit more, to focus on an area that's not in pain, to just take it one step at a time. Right. And so you're easing your suffering to the pain that's there. You're not taking away the pain.
Embrace the suck. That's always the phrase that comes to mind whenever it's at mile 20 and the race starts. Let's embrace the suck. So to tie this back to money, because that's what this is a money podcast, and our money moving along life with us and making sure that it's moving and helping us and fueling us. The lifestyle creep and the keeping up with the Joneses. If somebody is noticing that they're falling victim to that and this irrational spending, to even borrow a Gen X analogy, Jules from St. Elmo's Fire.
Yeah.
and her erratic spending in that movie. What steps should they go through before they just say, okay, I'm going to quit cold turkey and now I'm a neurotic saver? Because that's never a path. That's when it comes to addiction, that's not a solution. What steps should they go through for something like that to acknowledge it and then move through it?
Yeah. I love that you brought in Jules from St. Elmo's Fire, because that's another great example. Because if you remember, Rob Lowe came in when she was sitting in her empty bedroom with nothing because it had all been repossessed, and she's melting down and trying to freeze herself out of the apartment. He didn't come in and say, suck it up, cupcake. Right?
See, we told you.
Right? He sat down with her. He validated her experience and what she was going through. He acknowledged that in that moment, she didn't feel like enough, right? She literally didn't have a pot to piss in at that point. She had nothing in her room. So she didn't have enough. So let's start with, again, the acknowledging of the behavior of either spending too much or saving too much comes from that root of not enough.
Okay.
So get curious with yourself, write down in a journal, talk to a coach or a therapist, start to get curious about how is my not enoughness feeding that behavior. That's number one. Number two comes back to something we talked about in the previous episode, which is understanding your why, not just from the standpoint of core values, but from the standpoint of why is my behavior manifesting in this way? Because when we start to realize that we're doing this kind of behavior from a place of not feeling like we will ever have enough or be enough, it can start to shed light on the values that we think we're upholding. So if someone is overspending, they might think they have a value of freedom. We'll just take that for example, like overspending, lots of clothes. I just want to be able to buy what I want. Or maybe they have a value of beauty or fashion or outward appearance, whatever it might be. That value and the behavior associated with it can still be coming from a place of fear. That's how not enoughness manifests, is it makes us act from fear. So if you're buying a lot of things because you have a value of freedom or beauty, you might be acting to honor that value from a place of fear.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with fear. Again, it's a valid human emotion, and there are ways that we can have a healthy relationship with fear. When the fear is running your life and causing your bank account to be negative because you're spending more than you have, because you're trying to honor a value of freedom like Jules was in St. Elmo's Fire, that's honoring a value from a place of fear. You can honor that same value from a place of consciousness. So there are fear-based and conscious-based values, and sometimes the distinction isn't crystal clear. They can kind of be a combination of both. We want to learn to honor our values from a more conscious-based place. So in that moment, when somebody is spending more money than they have because they want to buy a lot of clothes or a big house or a car or whatever it is to feel free, that's coming from a place of fear. How could you honor that value of freedom from a more conscious place? Well, you could start by looking more long-term at what does your value of freedom mean for you, as opposed to freedom in the moment. I want to spend the money and have the thing.
Right.
How
because
is
that freedom in the moment, can potentially prevent freedom in the future, because now you're strapped with this car loan.
Yep.
And okay, so maybe a little deeper and a little bit more sinister. What if that's coming, how does envy drive that? Somebody,
fear.
Is that still fear of not being, is that fear of not being perceived like that person is being perceived because of the car they're driving, so I need to drive the same car or better, or the okay. So it's
and let's take that and workshop that a little bit, because again, envy is not bad, right? We want to look at what's the insight or the lesson that we can get from feeling envious or jealous.
Because we've all been envious of something at some time or another.
Right. So when we are feeling envy, number one, again, raise your awareness around how is it that I'm not feeling enough that is triggering this feeling of envy for me. Okay. Number two, then looking at, okay, I feel envious. What is this telling me about what I really want? Because when we're feeling envious, the definition of envy is wanting something else that someone has. So what is it that you want for yourself that's causing you to have these feelings of envy? And once you get real on, okay, I'll take a personal example. There's a podcaster, Rich Roll, who I adore, and I hope to have him on my podcast someday. I've had times of envying him because we have very similar, he's a former lawyer, former triathlete, like we have very similar paths in life. And now he's a hugely successful podcaster. And I've noticed myself getting very envious at times of him. When I feel that envy coming up, I notice, okay, I feel like I am not enough. I'm not a good enough podcaster. I'm not a good enough entrepreneur. Then the second step, what is that telling me? What's the insight that it wants me to have? And that insight is, oh, well, I want to have the kind of impact that Rich Roll is having. That's why I'm envious of him. Okay, so I want to have that kind of impact he's having. The next step is then, what values is that honoring for me? For me, that would honor a value of growth, of
Yeah.
compassion. So we have to understand that envy is not bad. It's there as a teacher, just like anger is there as a teacher, sadness is a teacher, inviting you into, well, what is it that's really beneath this that you want for yourself from a place of consciousness, not from a place of fear? If that makes sense.
Yeah, complete sense. So to tap into kind of the title of your podcast, the Gen X Shift, what transitions in life do these emotions or these thoughts and feelings, I guess, do they cause the shift, or are they a result of the shift, or is it both?
I think it can be both. And
Okay.
just let's bring it back to money. One of the biggest shifts that Gen Xers are facing obviously is saving for retirement,
Right.
or making sure the kids get through college, or having money to take care of parents. All money issues that the external circumstances of money are creating these shifts in our life, as well as our internal relationship with money. And so we want to learn, how can we more consciously move through these transitions and shifts. So this is where everything like money, for example, often is just a symptom of what's going on internally,
Okay.
right? Again, there are external things that we don't have control over.
I mean,
You may
it's
not
sort of
have.
like food. I mean, food can be the same thing. Is we overeat, eat too much, don't take care of our bodies. I mean, I don't want to pick on food,
Mhm.
but exercise, hoarding, for lack of a better, whether it's money or whether it's 50 years worth of newspapers. We're tapping into something that goes way deeper than I just like to read the newspaper.
Yeah. I the Whether it's food or money, again, it comes back to recognizing, what are we acting from?
Okay.
That we're often acting from these roots of not enoughness. We're trying to use something outside of ourselves to fill a hole that we perceive that's in us. And that's really the gift of not enoughness, because I don't think it's something to be vilified. I
No,
do
because I
think
mean,
it's
it
a
can drive
gift.
ambition, it can drive service, it can drive
Yes.
help and compassion and everything.
Yeah. And coming back to your Michael Jordan example, it can also drive us in a kind of interesting flip. When we get really comfy with our not enoughness, we can sort of get to the point of laughing at it.
Yeah,
Because if we realize, and it sounds a little nihilistic, but it's actually has a very deep meaning. When we realize, honestly, you're right. You are never enough. You will never have enough money. You will never be pretty enough or smart enough, because what are you measuring that against? What is enough?
sure.
Where are you getting that
It's a
story of
very
comparison?
abstract. Um,
Right. So when you realize, yeah, I'm not enough, it actually frees you up.
yeah.
Because if you realize, I'll never have enough money, I will never date Jason Momoa, like, it frees you up to realize, well, screw it then.
So
I'm going to enjoy my life.
as a self-proclaimed margarita snob, have you ever what have you had the best margarita, or have you
I make the best
you
margarita that
make the
there
best
is.
margarita?
I
Okay.
definitely make the best margarita that there is. So that
Are
is
you
enough.
is
My
that
margarita
a
is
is
enough.
that a recipe that you're willing to divulge here on the Wealth on the Move podcast?
Yes, and it's a recipe I actually found on the internet a long time ago, and I don't remember what the link is. I would love to give credit to the person. If I find it, I'll send it to you. But it's 3 parts tequila, 2 parts homemade simple syrup, 2 parts fresh lime, and a splash of water, shaking it up on the rocks with salt.
With salt.
That's all
Okay.
it is. Yep.
So I'd like
Like,
to
yeah.
see. I like a margarita. I'm far from a margarita aficionado. In our house, we've been into espresso martinis lately, which my wife
Oh,
makes a hell of a espresso martini.
I can't do martinis. The only liquor I do is tequila, and a little bit of dark rum, and it's got to be the agave tequila. But
Okay.
yeah, but yeah, coming back to that, like, that's where the beauty of getting really comfortable with these terrifying and heavy emotions. That's the freedom that comes in it. Because
Sure.
when you realize, like, bringing it back to money, how silly it is like whatever, and I'm not trying to diminish people's circumstances, but from an external standpoint, your financial goals are completely arbitrary.
Right.
You may think they're not arbitrary because you're like, no, I need this amount of money to pay off my house, put my kids through college, and save up for a retirement home.
Right.
Okay. Again, what's the story you're telling around that? And what's a different story that you might be able to tell? And can you embrace the fact that it is entirely possible that you will not have enough money for all of that? Because only when you get really comfortable and fully embrace that, yeah, I may not have enough, that's where you can actually free yourself of those burdens of feeling like
Yeah.
you have to scrimp and save. Because then you're like, well, screw it. If I'm not going to have enough, I'm going to go buy my camper van and I'm going to enjoy life. Or it frees you not in a way to be irresponsible, but it frees you from the resistance again that you're
From
having.
the emotional and mental burden
Right.
that comes with it. Because listen, I've been doing this business for 22 years, and in 22 years, I've never seen the same financial plan twice. We've never seen the same solution twice.
That should tell people something.
Well, and it's thankfully our profession's moving away from this, but thinking that going to this seminar where this financial product is discussed is going to solve all of my financial concern is a fool's errand. It's like, imagine if everybody drove a Toyota Camry. Not to take a knock at Toyota Camrys, they're great cars, but I have 3 kids and all 5 of us in my house like to play golf. I cannot move 5 sets of golf clubs from point A to point B with a Toyota Camry. It's not going to solve my so to go to the dealership and be sold a Toyota Camry, just like to go to this, dinner seminar to be sold a financial product because it's going to solve all of my issues is, it's a fool's errand that they're tapping into all of the things we discussed instead of you tapping into the things that we've discussed.
Yeah. Can we take that Camry example and
Sure.
sort of bring in everything that we've talked about? Because it's a great example. In your situation, you could very easily slip into the mindset of, I have to get a minivan, or I have to get some gigantic car to accommodate all of these sets of golf clubs.
Right.
So in that situation, the painful event, there are all kinds of different pains. So let's not even do any pain comparisons of, oh, poor Will, like how painful of him to have to cart 5 bags. No, that's an annoyance. That's a kind of pain for you, right? And that's legitimate. So let's remember that. So the painful thing is that you have a family of 5 and you have 5 golf sets that you need to find a way to transport so that you can all get to the golf course. If you are finding yourself saying, I have to get a bigger car, I have to. Number one, notice that language. When we're saying I have to, I need to, that is a big alarm bell showing you that you are acting from a place of fear.
Okay.
And not enoughness, right? Like I have to.
Right.
Just even the energy of that feels heavier, right? What we want to do, not from a toxic positivity, flip the light switch mentality, is to look at that situation from the standpoint of how am I resisting that pain? Like I'm resisting the fact that I feel like I have to get a bigger car to transport all this crap just so my family and I can go have fun, right? How you could look at that is recognize that not enoughness, see it as an invitation, see the story that you're telling and see what other story can I tell. And the other story that you can tell is I'm honoring a value of family time.
Okay.
I want to be able to accommodate 5 bags of golf clubs because I want to be able to have my family experience the joy of playing golf together. So notice how that eases the resistance to that painful situation. So now it's, I know I want to give this experience to my family.
Yes.
I feel that. It comes back to your question, how your feelings, like I feel that in my chest, in my stomach, the warmth, the openness of wanting to give my family that experience. And so from that place, now you're like, I want to be able to have a car that accommodates 5 bags of golf clubs. That energy is just different.
Yeah.
You feel better about that. It frees you up. And that's what we can do
Also makes you
across the
feel better
board.
about the payment for the SUV.
Well, exactly, because then,
Right.
truly, because then,
Yeah,
and coming back to
I
like
say that
keeping
tongue
up
in
with the
cheek, but
Joneses,
you're spot on. Right.
yeah, because then it's no, I want this. And so, yeah, every month when that payment hits, instead of, God, I got to make this payment, it's no, I am choosing from a more conscious place to accept and make this payment. I don't have to make this payment. I could sell that car and choose to not have my family go play golf together. I am choosing to have my family be able to play golf. So I am choosing to make this payment. Right. So it's
Yeah.
easing that resistance to making that payment every month. If you can make financial decisions from that place of I want to, so that you're more consciously honoring your values, so that you're seeing that, yeah, I'm doing this because I want to, not to slap a bandage on my wound of not enoughness. I'm doing it because I saw the insight from that. And this is what I really want to do, not because it reflects on my value as a father or a provider, but because it's what I want to do
Yeah.
for myself and my family.
As always, incredible insight into how we make the decisions and why, and how to avoid making, perilous decisions when it comes to our money as well. I have two final
Yeah.
questions. The first one is: Is there anything that I should have asked that I didn't when it comes to Life from the Summit and helping folks with their money?
I don't think there's anything you didn't ask. I think that we could always talk about a million other things.
Sure.
And I think if I can just leave folks with this one little nugget, it's that the whole point of everything we've talked about is to be able to put you in a space where you are responding with wisdom instead of reacting from an unwise place. So it's about wise response instead of unwise reaction. That's all we're doing here, is
Yeah.
trying to put you in a better place from your nervous system and your brain to be able to make wise responses instead of unwise
Right.
reactions, whether you're talking
Because
about money or whatever.
when our thoughts and emotions are bad, it has a negative impact on your body. Your back hurts. You're tense. You're in pain. Your diet stinks. I mean, it's all tied together. I mean, it's as much as we'd love to see the balance sheet numbers be higher in a lot of regards, it's much more important for. I mean, we're all people navigating through this world together. For us to feel better, be better, treat each other better, that all becomes important. And the next question I have, and I'm taking this, I'm stealing it. I hope that it's okay. I'm sure that after watching his videos and his podcast, he's going to be okay with this. I saw this on the podcast, The Diary of a CEO, and it's a great question for us to be able to link together folks with different disciplines, backgrounds, different shows. And since you're the first guest that I'm asking this to, you're kind of off the hook because you don't have to answer somebody else's question. But what is one question you would like us to ask the next guest that we have on the Wealth on the Move podcast?
I love that question. I'd never heard that before. I've heard of that podcast.
It's incredible. I mean, it's an incredible show. I don't want to disrupt your thought process there, but it really is, especially when it comes to our health and food and achieving things. I mean, it's a great show that I found myself getting lost in from time to time.
Yeah, I will definitely check that out. And obviously, not knowing what type of guest you might have on the next podcast,
I don't
I
know
think
either. So that
I think I think the one thing, like the common through line, no matter what you do for a living or who your next guest is or what your belief system is, like no matter what it is how is your not enoughness showing up in your life?
writing it down like I can't go back and watch the recording of this. And then,
Technology. You can always go back and
yes.
check again.
Well, again, it's a pleasure. As always, I look forward to being able to try the famous Michele Walter margarita at some point, and
Yep.
us let these conversations tailspin into who knows where. If you're listening, please check out the Gen X Shift podcast.
Thank
It
you.
is a tremendous way to just level set our own thoughts and quite frankly let ourselves off the hook for some of our thoughts. we're recording this 2 days after the election. Michele just had a great episode on just the way any of us, red, blue, purple, doesn't matter, how we thought about the election, what we think about the results, how to, interpret those thoughts so that, we can move forward as an electorate, as a society, as families and friends, and not let this disrupt those relationships. It is a tremendous use of your time to go back and check it out. But every episode she has is remarkable. So again, thank you, Michele.
Thank you.
We'll link the podcast in our show notes and a link to Life at the Summit, her business and her website. But please check that out. You will have much more insight after an episode than you did going in. I promise you that.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy our conversations. I want to have you back on the podcast too. So
yep, you'll definitely be a return guest. And then we'll have a more sinister question from whoever the previous guest was to ask you.
Yeah, I love that you're doing that. That's really cool.
I saw it and I borrowed it. I said, I'm copying it. I'm stealing it. I'm not even going to apologize for doing it because I think it's such a great way to link together.
Yeah.
Just what we're all doing. And if our next guest is an accountant, asking them that question is going to be important. If our next guest is an attorney, is a stockbroker, it doesn't matter. Understanding that question, I can't wait to hear the answer and can't wait to hear what their question is for our next guest.
Yeah, I would be curious now. I'll definitely tune in to hear what the answer is.
Yep. So from Wealth on the Move, the podcast, thank you for listening, and we look forward to our next conversation. Thanks again.
The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Hoffman Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.